Yeah, you better. Yeah, you better. Yeah, you better. Yeah, you better.
What's up, world? Welcome to another episode of The Inner Court. You know, it's VO here, co-host Neem. And you know, this is The Inner Court where we know it ain't on you, it's in you. Today we got a special guest in the building. He's a top-rated orthopedic doctor, New York chief medical officer and head team physician at the New Jersey Devils, chief medical advisor for the Philadelphia 76ers, Crystal Palace FC, medical consultant for the Clippers, and the guy who fixed my knee multiple times, both knees. Everybody welcome Dr. Jonathan Glashow to the show.
Thank you, buddy.
My boy. I really admire Dr. Glashow.
Awesome,
I like him a lot. I like him a lot.
You guys are too kind. I value this opportunity. I'm grateful to be here. It's wonderful to see Vic and Nieman together, and Vic doing so nicely and so well in so many ways. So thank you for the opportunity. It's great to reconnect.
That's so awesome. So Dr. G, how did it all start for you? What made you, get into the field that you're in? And what was your journey to get to where you're at now?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the show's long enough for that, but I don't want to bore you. But I'll tell you the highlights. My dad was a doctor. First of all, Vio, I admire your family. I met your mom and dad, and they have a tremendous influence on us. My dad was ear, nose, and throat plastic surgeon, and I watched him growing up, and I admired what he did and how many people he helped and how the people and patients responded to him, and I never forgot it. So I loved science. That's my strong suit. I'm not good in English. I like the math and science. I watched my dad. I thought medicine was a good fit. So I was lucky. I got into medical school early, and I was going through medical school, and I really liked cardiology for some reason. I don't know why. I just fell into it. I was working in a lab at WashU in St. Louis over a summer. I got a DuPont fellowship. I was doing this lab thing, and I was telling my dad, who was a surgeon, and I said, I'm thinking of doing cardiology. And he looked at me, he goes, no, that's not going to work. He goes, you should be an orthopedic surgeon. He goes, look at your hands, look what you like. You should be an orthopedic surgeon. And, he didn't push me. He never pushed me. But he was right. And the more I did it, and the more I tried it, the more I got involved, it was the right fit. And I'm very fortunate to have a job that doesn't feel like a job, because I don't call it work, because I enjoy it so much. And so that's the mini version. I got influenced by my dad, but had this love for science and tech, and that kind of fits what I do. And that's it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
When he was referencing your hands, what did he mean?
I have big hands. So
orthopedic for being a surgeon?
It's good for being an orthopedic surgeon. It is. One of my mentors, who was the chief at HSS at the time, Russ Warren, when I was in medical school, he had bigger hands, and he was the team doc for the Giants and others. And, orthopedics is not cardiac surgery. It's different. And so I think I have an advantage. The old days, orthopedics was fixing bones and joints, and now it's more, especially in my world, arthroscopic and microsurgical work. My hands work great. And I think it's advantageous to have the reach of fingers rather than small fingers for the kind of technology we do. So he was right. He saw that before his time.
So if someone is looking at different surgeons, they should look at their hands.
That's what Nieman said. I think, listen, we could talk about how to choose doctors, and I think Vic has more experience than any of us, me. Yeah. But I think it's a combination of things. Hand size isn't a deterrent, and people work around it, but it's the package I think you got to choose, not just the hands.
If you could say what an orthopedic surgeon is in the most layman terms possible, what would you describe it as?
So it's interesting, ortho, so if you go to the Latin derivation, ortho means straight and pede means foot. So the name itself doesn't reflect what we do. Orthopedic surgery and the study of it entails the study of the musculoskeletal system, the muscles and the bones. And that's a huge topic. But in orthopedic surgery, there are many, many subspecialties. You and I know each other for sports medicine, which is the treatment of athletes who most commonly get tendon injuries and injuries to knees and shoulders. So that's really what sports medicine orthopedic surgery has distilled down to. But there are other parts of orthopedic surgery, like spine surgery, foot and ankle surgery, hand surgery, orthopedic oncology or bone tumors, which is a sad field, but a very necessary one. And so they're numerous, but you and I know orthopedic surgery is musculoskeletal, tendons, bones, knee and shoulder. And that's kind of what I do, knee, shoulder, tendon injuries.
So you cut people open.
Well, well, something, Vic, years ago you could say that, but as well as I, or maybe not so well in your case, but most of the stuff I do is arthroscopic, which means we put a little tiny tube inside and we put camera or instruments in, and through that we can see things, and we don't have to open things up.
That's good. That's awesome.
So, and that saves a lot of recovery. It gives us a better view with less invasiveness, but there are times, as you very well know, unfortunately, that we have to make incisions, but even our incisions are smaller than they used to be because our technology is better.
I have a lot of respect for you being able to do that, and of course, what you done for me. Excuse me. But my question is, so what is it like? What is it like preparing to go into surgery? I know it's for us, like preparing for a game is or the NBA Finals or a playoff game is intense, but this is not. It's not that. You know what I'm saying? It's totally different when you're kind of under a microscope and you're trying to perform and do what's best for a patient. So what is it like, and do you do anything specific in preparation to prepare yourself to go into surgery that it's like a routine type of ordeal that could be similar to an athlete or someone in their everyday routine?
I think it's a great analogy, and I take every surgery case and surgery day very seriously. I don't know what it's like to play at your level in a sport. I was never that kind of athlete, but I imagine it's the same sort of thing where you want to do your very best, and there's no chance to slip up, and there's no room for mistakes. So it starts with, in my world, being physically able to do it, so staying fit. So I think if I'm not fit and able to withstand a day of surgery, I shouldn't be doing it. So I focus on my health and wellness and well-being. That's just the background. But I also have a great team around me that helps me get into surgery. You met Chris, who's my physician assistant. He's prepped things. We have certain parts that we need for different cases and different tools and instruments. And he's been with me and knows it so well that he's been my right hand in preparing things to have at surgery, because there's so much technology that we utilize and so many different pieces of technology that we prepare days, weeks before, and the night before. We have imaging from MRIs and X-rays and CAT scans and other that we always review and go over. And we're now in the process of using 3D modeling to better predict what we're going to find at surgery, so that we have these models and have these tools that enable us to see what we're going to find before we get in there. So it's like a game. You got to prepare for it. There's got to be a strategy, but it starts with health and player health, and surgeon health, I think, in some ways have some similarities. And I think those people who take care of themselves last longer and do better, and those that don't. And just like players, we're somewhat of an athlete, but not an athlete like you, but you have to be physically fit. Surgery is mentally and physically challenging. And you don't even know what the time is like there. When surgery starts, you get into it, and I don't look at the clock. I never do. And sometimes I could be there for a long case, which for me would be 2 hours, and it feels like a moment. And you have to be fit to be able to do that time and time again, to be at your best, to hold things and move things in ways that are necessary to get the right result.
Yeah, I mean, but yeah, I do. I think there is a little bit of I don't know if you want to call it a stigma on, a lot of people are afraid of, kind of getting and cut open. I know that kind of sounds a little harsh, but I don't mean it in a harsh way at all. But, a lot of people are kind of, they kind of get a little hesitant with, going, that far and trying to help themselves in that way. And, I think it's definitely important to hear that the repetition and preparing for these surgeries is taken seriously, and I think it's definitely, it builds a trust, and it makes them more comfortable with making that decision if, God forbid, they ever have to. So that's basically why I asked that question before.
I think it's an important question, and I think that patients and athletes should be better informed, and I think they need to make smart choices. I mean, obviously, you can share from your experiences, what a smart choice is, and maybe what wasn't as smart a choice. But I think surgery shouldn't be taken lightly, and I love telling patients they don't need surgery, but I think it's a misnomer to believe that the conservative thing is not surgery. In other words, sometimes the conservative approach is to do surgery. And I define the conservative thing as the more predictable, better long-term outcome. And I use this example, and I tell patients sometimes, like, unfortunately, Steve Jobs, who is a very famous, tech guy, who tried to avoid surgery early on by getting alternative treatments, and that didn't work out so well. Had he had surgery earlier, the result may have been different. So sometimes surgery with the right surgeon for the right reason is a more predictable, successful result. And listen, I've been on the other side. I've had surgery. I've had back surgery. I've had shoulder surgery, and it's frightening. But you make the right choices and you do it in a prepared way, I think the results can be incredible and really life-changing, game-changing.
What did Steve Jobs need surgery on?
He had cancer early on, and he wanted to take, and I don't know the whole story in great detail, so I may be misquoting some of the details, but the theme of that description to me is, had he had earlier intervention, had the cancer taken out, perhaps he would be around to talk about it today. Unfortunately, he took alternative treatments, the cancer spread, and at that time it was too late. So surgery isn't always this evil word. Sometimes it's a life-saving approach.
Yeah.
And that's why I'd like, athletes and others to think about, sometimes a little surgery early on prevents a lot of bigger surgery later. So I think you have to just differentiate those things.
Doc, let me ask you something. Why are guys getting hurt at a more rapid rate nowadays?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I don't know the exact stat. I know it feels like more guys are getting hurt more frequently. And I don't know the exact answers, but I have a few theories, I think the kids that are coming up have been playing, one-dimensional ball from early on without rest. The number of games that are being played, the size of the guys involved, the intensity of the games that are involved, and the lack of rest and recovery probably contribute to why that happens. The body's not a machine. It is a machine, but it's not a mechanical machine, and it's alive, and it requires rest and recovery. And I don't think that's been a focus of a lot of sports medicine departments and teams, where that recovery process is as important as the training process in order to prevent injury. So I think it's a combination. They're starting younger. They're not getting the best advice. They're not getting the rest. And the player load is just more. I mean, the number of back-to-back games, the number of games, even regular season games, and the frequency. And sometimes they're stacked, close together. Then there's a bigger break. But I think it's all of the above, and it's not just one aspect to it.
Yeah. So, man, I mean, you started early in the sense of like even the kids starting earlier in their childhood, and it's this number of reps starting from age, whatever, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Yeah.
Just number of reps. And then, how does one incorporate rest? Like when should they rest?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. I don't think we have all the answers. So I think back to this example of this young fellow who came to me, who I think he was in he was 10, 11, and a high-level ball player in Miami. And he had an abnormality of his knee that we call osteochondritis, which is a congenital thing where a piece of the cartilage and bone lost blood supply and a fragment flipped off. And he was telling me he was being pushed through playing by those around him because the parents and coaches and people who he surrounded himself didn't want him to miss any time. And so that was an example of, and we caught it early. His parents reached out to me through, I think he was friends with one of the ex-Sixers sons. And so he came to me and I changed kind of what we were going to do. I said, you got to fix this knee and then bring him back up. And when I learned what he was doing early on, in other words, no resting games, playing year round, never cross training. And the training he was doing wasn't really ideal for basketball. I mean, we changed all that. And now fast forward 2-3 years and he's killing it. And I think there's every sport requires a different form of rest period and time, but it's got to be built in. So I don't have a one-word answer to you other than it's a very important part of training and longevity in sports. There's something on here. Does that make sense? Or
yes,
no, it makes a lot of sense. And in professional sports, do you feel like guys are coming back too early from injury?
I think sometimes they are. That's a big, as you guys know through Vic and maybe some others, that a big part of what I feel I may do differently is the follow-up to surgery and the return to play program and looking for objective measures that say, hey, you're ready. I mean, people always ask me, they come back from a surgery in pro sports and even lesser than pro sports, and they go, oh, so at 6 months, I'll be fine. And I go, it doesn't really work that way. I mean, it's not just a time element. Time is one factor that contributes to the return to play program. But if you don't do your homework and you don't do these exercises and you can't show us that your strength, flexibility, conditioning is back, it may be a forever for return to sport. And unfortunately, I think there are others who would just say, 6 months ACL, you're good to go. And I think that's a dangerous way to approach it. Time is one element and one factor that allows a successful recovery, but you can't underestimate the value of readiness in the form of performance, strength, flexibility, conditioning, and just a slow ramp up even when that's done. So when you're going back, for instance, in basketball, you go the 1-on-1, 2-on-2, 3-on-3, all the way up. And then when you go back to minutes, the body, it's not so much how much you tax the body, it's the rate of change that really hurts people. It's like from doing really little to doing a real lot. That's what gets people in trouble more than the absolute load.
Yeah, it's funny because I think when they try to give you a time period to come back, I think that's fool's gold. And I think it's actually ruining players, in my opinion. I think sometimes that there's this misconception that just because we are the highest athletes and we're the highest performers in the world, that we're not human. And an average human, you know what I'm saying, it would take them longer than 6 months to get back from an ACL or a torn ligament. You know what I'm saying? It would take them longer.
Absolutely.
And they sometimes think that they justify the time period. And when we come back based off the fact that we are high level athletes, but even in then we're still human. And when your body breaks down, I feel like you have to let that human side of you have to let it heal. You have to give it its time to heal. I think that's a big misconception from my own personal opinion. Also, it's tough. I've, as you guys both know, I've been through a lot. And it's, I think that the biggest thing I want to ask Doc, for you is a lot of times I feel like, from just being in this position, hearing other athletes reach out to me and stuff like that, athletes just need to know that this doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. And I feel like there's a lot of times when they're, in a position where they might get hurt and then they need surgery, a lot of things around them will make it feel like it's them and make them feel like they're lesser than and make them feel like they didn't, or that they did something wrong almost in a sense, especially, your body is fight or flight when it's in that, when something happens, it goes into defense mode, it starts protecting you. So there's also a mental aspect to it. But what would you say to an athlete most athletes, I feel like, who might feel like after they have surgery and they go through something, that they feel like that there's something wrong with them. And I feel like they should have a mentality of, nah, he made me stronger. I'm better off now than I was before. What recommendations or what things would you tell an athlete if they might be going through those hard mental breakdowns?
Yeah, first, it's very helpful to hear it from your perspective. I mean, you're at the highest level of athleticism in basketball, and to hear how you feel, it's sometimes, I get caught and we get caught in a tunnel and don't appreciate it. First of all, everybody gets injured. I mean, at some point, there's very few that escape injury. Not everybody has surgery, but almost everybody that I see in high-level sports who performs at the level that you do and go postseason, there's always an injury. So first of all, there's nothing abnormal about that. And we love to prevent all injuries, but I don't think that's realistic. There's certain things that are unpredictable, like traumas, and people get tripped up and fall or get hurt, and they tear their ACL or they tear their shoulder or they tear a ligament, and it's inevitable. I think there are things that we can do to better prepare for that. And I think it's completely human, and it's, the human body is really good at healing itself if you give it a chance. Mm-hmm. And I think you bring up an important point, Vio, that we have to give the body a chance. And well, what does that mean? Well, there are many facets. One is rest and sleep, and one is nutrition, and one is a ramp up in training that's reasonable. And I think that's different for different people in different sports and in different injuries. But it's amazing. If you give the body a chance, it will often heal itself. Now, there are exceptions. When you tear a ligament or you tear a tendon, you got to put it back. There's no magic dust out there with an injection or a pill that's going to mechanically put things back. But absent that disconnect, the body can heal muscle tears. The body can heal, inflammation and other things. And so what I say is, we got to look at people as individuals. A lot of modern medicine likes to take shortcuts and treat everybody, uniformly. I don't want to use the food analogy like it's McDonald's, everything's the same, but it's very cookie cutter. And I think that's very dangerous. I think we're all very different. Although we have a lot of similarities, we have to look at the individual athlete, and we have to assess their condition and what brought them to that injury possibly, and what's missing and correct it. So there's no one word answer other than there are big groups of things we need to look at, including nutrition, rest, socialization for mental things, and then strength and conditioning and rehab. And I think they all contribute to a successful recovery and longevity. So several factors.
Yeah. And it's one thing I love about Neem is recently, we have a lot of conversations, and Neem had told me one time, in our floating in our conversations, bro, you just got too much power. You were able to produce so much force that your body couldn't handle the power that's in you. And, I think that is something that, well, first off, get you a Neem in your life. And I know I ain't just telling bro that because bro's sitting there, but that's so profound and so powerful because of the fact, someone going through their journey that I'm on, to have someone like that in my corner telling me that I think is just as essential to your healing process as someone who is your orthopedic surgeon as well. On top of that, you got to do the work too. And a lot of times I feel like with athletes, especially when we get hurt, it gets harder, especially because you're sitting and you're waiting and you're sitting and you have a high metabolism. So during that time you're sitting and you're waiting, you're making up for that high metabolism by doing things that you probably shouldn't be doing. And when you get back moving and get back grooving, you got to let those crutches go. Not only the ones that you're using physically, but the ones that you kind of used as a crutch non-physically to make up for the fact that you weren't playing. And at the end of the day, Dr. Glashow could do 100 surgeries on me. I could have 100 David Alexanders, 100 PTs, 100. No one's going to heal me better than I can heal myself. So the small things, the little things that you're doing at home, away from the PTs, away from the doctors, all matter. Every single second, especially when you get hurt, every single second of it matters. And what you're telling yourself and how you're feeding all those entries to your galaxy, to your gateways in your body. All those things are important. And when you get hurt, just like you've had the power to produce that amount of force, you have the power to bring yourself back to life as well. And it's just about being efficient and disciplined. And it gets harder when you get hurt. It gets harder because while you're sitting there, you're seeing everybody. You're seeing all the others fly around. You're seeing all the others get all the accolades. You're seeing all the others rise to the occasion. And they don't treat you right. They don't treat you better when you get hurt. Not in sports. It's worse. That's just a part of it. It's not like they have this system where all the hurt guys come over here and that's not a thing. So, but that you don't need that. A lot of people don't even have that amount of force and that power to produce that period. So why not just tell yourself that makes you special and make the most of it? I think that also is a huge key to healing. And I didn't mean to get a rant, but obviously, I get a little emotional. You know what I'm saying? I didn't mean a rant right there. This is about you, Dr. G, you know what I'm saying, about us. But I'm just saying, like, it's really important. It's really critical. You know what I mean? Like, for real. So, but
I want to thank you for sharing that, Vio. And it must not be easy to share some of these feelings and what you've been through was, you've been through so much. And I'm super impressed with how you've handled it and come through. And I think Nieman's spot on that, your abilities are, an asset and a risk all the same time, because you're an exceptional human. And I mean that in several ways, but I think the way we're referring to is physically, your body can do things that the average person or average NBA player just can't do. And having that amount of horsepower and having that amount of energy has its inherent risks. Now, I think you and I talked early on when we met, and I think there were some risk factors that could have been avoided. But I think it's really valuable to those around and the kids that are out there, and some of them who I see, to hear this from you, because it's very uplifting and it's very encouraging, and it gives them a path forward. But I think one of the things you mentioned, or one of the things I distill from this thing that you just said, is that you're only as good as your weakest link. And you can get great surgery and you can have great PTs, but that's not enough. You need to take ownership. You need to do your thing and close the loop on making sure all those variables are under control, because we're only as good as our weakest link. And it's in surgery too. You got to do everything right. You can't, if you miss one thing, the whole thing falls apart. And I think it's really important. I think what we can do, and I think part of what you're doing, is giving back to the world by sharing your experience and showing the younger athletes that are out there and coming up that there is a path forward, but you got to control the variables. You got to do your homework and you got to work hard. And I think it's a great message. And I think doing that, I like to say to you, and I think we may have had one of these chats where, hey, I want to make you better than you were before. Because when we first met, I couldn't even believe that you were playing. I said that, and I still say
crazy experience.
It's impressive to me. Like, you were driving a race car with 3 wheels in a Grand Prix race, and you were still finishing the race. And like, you can't do that in real life with most situations. And a tribute to you to be able to function at that level. When I said to you, hey, I want to make this so, when you come back, you're better than ever, because you have been dealt such challenging cards and you really overcame them with such energy that was remarkable, impressive and admirable all the same time.
Thank you, Doc. I really appreciate that. I mean, it's, again, like, it's not just me, man. Like, I have some great individuals. Neem is one of them, my family, everybody, they definitely, played a part in just me, they're my roots. You know what I'm saying? They and Neem continue to water my roots. You know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, it's just real. It's just real, and I want to be a light for the world. You know what I'm saying? I want people to know. I feel like what I'm going through is people go through things. Just like you said, like, no matter what, you're going to get hurt. Sports, you're going to get hurt in sports. And in life, no matter what, you're going to go through something. And I want to be a light to show people that not only can you go through something, but you can stand at the top of the mountains, and no matter how many mountains you have to climb, and you can move them joints. So for me, that's what I'm focused on, and showing people like, man, God is real. So that's really what I'm focused on. That's why I can't never stop. I mean, it's not, obviously I got the energy too. Like, I don't know where it comes from, but, but that's a big part as well. But Doc, what do you think is, I'm sorry to cut you, but.
No, I just wanted to say a couple of things that I think you're blessed in many ways. And I also had the privilege to meet your mom and dad. And I don't think that's I don't think it's unrelated, that your mom, smart and energetic, and your dad, very bright, all contributed to your ability to be where you're at. And I think it's important for people to acknowledge, where we came from and who influenced us.
Yes,
And you said it yourself, your family and Nieman, and you're lucky to have those folks around you. And I think it's the total package thing to recover. And I don't want to, take too much time, but I think that's important to acknowledge. And I think you're lucky, and I think you're blessed, and good for you.
Brother. I appreciate it. What do you think is the, one of the most, you have various sports that you work with, but what do you think in each sport is the most common injuries that you see out there?
Yeah. So for my world in basketball, if you look at the NBA stats and all players that come through, the ankles and foot injuries are the most common, but that doesn't mean they're the most devastating. For me, the things in basketball that I find most common are, knee and shoulder. And in the knee, this extensor mechanism like patella tendon, quad tendon is fairly common. And obviously ACL and meniscus. And we can talk about why that is. I mean, that's basketball. Football's more all over the place, from, ripped pec tendons to Achilles injuries, to knee and shoulder as well. But they take more brutal things, plus the concussion. And then I see, similar patterns in hockey, because I do a lot of hockey stuff because of my role with the Devils. And in those combat sports where there's greater force interacting, there's that, knee shoulder combination, dislocated shoulders, torn ACLs, torn other ligaments in the knee. So it's all over the place. But I think, basketball's a little more unique because the stresses in basketball in some ways are, on a hard court, a lot of volume of load, a lot of volume of time on the court. So it's just a little bit different.
That was great. Do you think that there is a way to, do you think that I'm gonna just say it. Do you think that training and sports performance attributes to players getting injured? The way they're training, how they're training.
I think big picture, we can do a better job. I think we can all do a better job in preparing athletes for the season. I think it's an extremely demanding season, even without the postseason, as you could tell me better than you. But I think we can do a better job in strength and conditioning and managing, sort of formulas for different athletes or different position players of how to train better, how to be better prepared for the season, how to work better with nutrition and overall health that can minimize it. But, no matter what you do, this is an extremely, we're just staying on basketball for a moment. It's an extremely challenging, load, heavy sport. You're running up and down the court, so many transitions per game. There's so many games per year. The game has gotten more explosive. So certain things are unavoidable, but I think we could do a better job. I mean, some of it's on the team and then some of it's on the player. Right. I mean, there's, in the locker room, there's some players who are super prepared, who come into preseason having trained and conditioned over the summer. And as well as I do, there's some players out there who come in very out of shape. So I'm not blaming any one person or team, but there's a great deal of variability. And I think we can do things in a better way, both players and teams. And I think the players need to speak up, and I think the teams need to be more forceful in making sure that players who are going to play are prepared to play. They're fit, they're conditioned, they're strong, and they've ramped up their load. And I think if we do that well, in a perfect world, we could decrease the number of injuries that happen. But it's asking a lot. It's asking a lot of players. It's asking a lot of teams. And, teams need to, star players don't always agree to testing, don't always agree to being weighed, don't always agree to other things. And I think they should be held to the same standards because it's really in their best interest, in their best long-term productivity. I'm sorry to go, long-winded on this.
No. It's good. It's really good.
And I think these are all factors, and it's different for different players, as you know, and you know who I'm talking about. Some of the guys out there, they're Victor Oladipos. They come in prepared and do all their homework, and others, they show up, with a cheeseburger, and it's different.
You think, like, when you reference like being healthy and eating correctly, do you feel like some players can drink beers and perform well and not get hurt? Or do you think that players like shouldn't do that? Because even in the player community, like there are some players that are like, no, I can still perform at a high clip, still smoke, still drink, still party. I don't really eat that well, but I go out there and I score 40s.
Yeah. So
what would you say to him?
I would say, without addressing any particular player, I think you can do all that stuff for a while. And, just because you can do it once or twice or do it in your early years doesn't mean it's okay. That's one thing. I'm not saying you can't eat, drink, party, and ignore your health, but all these things, and if you listen to what I'm about to say, I think you'll see it play out. It eventually catches up. Now, when you're young and you're 20 and you do whatever you want and you get away with it, but, that's not what LeBron does. And you can't do that at 40. And the other thing I'd say, I'm not saying you can't go out and have a good time and you can't have beer or smoke a little stuff or whatever. I'm not saying that. I like the Winston Churchill thing, which is, everything in moderation, kind of except moderation itself. So listen, we're human and the players are human, although they perform like superhumans. You got to give them the opportunity to unwind and do their thing. That doesn't mean they can never have a beer or never go out and party. It just means their base has to be really strong. And you can get away with a poor base for a while, but eventually it catches up. And it always does. And so those guys that are coming in the league who are better prepared, who are stronger, whose diets are tighter, whose sleep patterns are better, who are not doing as much recreational stuff, they just last longer and do better. They just do. There's no secret. But it doesn't mean you can't play once in a while. I mean, play meaning have some fun.
No, I get it. That was good. That was good.
Yeah, for sure.
Why do you think it's, in my experience, it's really hard to find the Ferrari or the Rolls Royce of PTs, of nutritionists, of just health and wellness. It's like you have to put together like this puzzle piece.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, if I can expound on that answer, I think it starts with the medical staffs of the teams. And, I have relationships with a lot of the professional basketball teams. And I'm just going to be blunt, like Vic's being blunt, and saying, look, the choices they make to bring in physical therapy and often doctors may not be solely based on talent. For instance, in the player and in the ownership world of pro basketball teams, there's this thing called sponsorship. And when a big sponsor comes in and says, we're going to name the arena or be this, we want to bring our doctor in. Well, who's your doctor? Well, your doctor happens to be a junior doctor, but we're paying for the medical, of the team. So we want to have our doctor there. That doctor brings in that physical therapist. Is it because they're the best physical therapist or the most experienced doctor? I venture to say not always, and that's being polite. So I think, it's because of people like you, Nieman, that, and Vic's other experience, that you have to sift through, talent rather than just who the assigned person is. And the assignment is based upon financial relationships often more than talent relationships. And that's just my opinion. And I think it's often the truth. So you go through this world, you're in PT and, you have the traditional physical therapy group that's taking care of the old lady with a broken hip, and they send a physical therapist to take care of a Victor Oladipo. Right. The talent's different. And, it relies, and that's why the NBA PA can be a valuable resource, or relationships with other players can be a resource. And it starts with the doctors. And if the doctors aren't people who have a ton of experience in taking care of the athletes and their physical therapists aren't, I think you have to sort out who are. And you're right, it's a challenge. And should it be? No. But I think, the owners, sometimes the ownership groups have different relationships than the players. And I think the player players talk amongst each other. I think Vic could speak better to that than I, and the NBA Player Association perhaps knows others. But you're right, and it's frustrating for me because I deal with that and deal with teams that, and not all of them, and some of them have a better outlook and a more specialized group of doctors and therapists. I think it's people like you, Nieman, who've made the difference to be able to sort out, seek out those that are best for that particular condition for that particular player. But I think it's ownership, financial intertwinements that have somewhat gotten in the way, not always.
Got it. Yeah, because you see it often. Like you'll see the hospital branding somewhere in the arena.
For sure.
And oftentimes it's
gonna be there.
Big. It's not there. Small. You don't have to look very far to see it.
No, it's a multi-million-dollar contract. And for that, obviously, there's a bit of a quid pro quo. We put our doctor in there. And then, the junior level players don't have the availability to always they should have the ability to get second opinions and reach out not only for doctors, but for PTs. But so that's kind of what happens.
Do you feel like that is like that in the NFL?
Yes.
Yeah.
It is.
And the reason why I asked that is because I just see on Hard Knocks more so than anything that their facilities are just so much bigger, and they're like the employees that they have, it seems like they have every department, versus when I see like a basketball team, it's like they may have like 3 PTs, 1 team doctor, but like the facility isn't like, they don't, the PT room and recovery rooms, you wouldn't think that $100 million players are going to do their PT in those rooms, in the arenas, in those practice facilities.
I haven't taken the survey of all the NFL versus NBA teams, but I think it's similar in the sense that relationships are created by this sponsorship.
Yeah.
And I think players, I don't want to say be skeptical, but player beware. And, routine things are fine. But, without pointing out specific examples, without incriminating, I hear stories all the time that, this PT is doing this kind of thing where it's really, in my world, or my opinion, very different than what should be. And that's happened, I've seen in the NFL, in the NBA, and in hockey. And so I think that, players need, it's like Vic said, personal responsibility. You got to be involved. You got to look out for you. Isn't that what your agent and advisor or manager should be doing? And looking for that specialist who can best advise. Sometimes the care is okay. And for routine aches and pains, it's probably fine. But for complicated things, they have in the NFL, how many players? 50 something to take care of. They kind of, the guys often get swept under the rug. And I see it a lot in the NFL without mentioning teams. I've seen players mishandled or just mismanaged or suboptimally managed. Yeah. And then the agent gets involved and then it's corrected.
In that same sense, in the surgeon world, there are like Ferrari, there are like top guys in the surgeon world. And then there are guys that are maybe marketed better. How do you feel about that in a sense of you having to compete with someone's maybe like they market better? Because I see this a lot in the surgeon world, in the PT world, where you may have a guy who just knows how to in the trainer world, where you might have a guy that just knows how to market better, but the guy who has the better ability, he's so focused on his craft that he didn't have marketing training or who know how to market. What do you say to that? So, because I feel like there has to be a place where people who are really good at what they do, because there are really good surgeons where you really have to do your homework. They're really good PTs, but you really have to do your homework and sift through the bullshit, so to say, because it's like, it's bullshit. People market so well that's who pops up when you think of, PTs or trainers, basketball trainers, and then it's not until you kind of go all in with them until you understand, like, oh wow, this guy was just really good at marketing. He wasn't really good at training. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I think it's a challenge, and I could see it from the player's perspective. But I think it goes back to what I just mentioned earlier. So you go to some big sponsor who it's either a university or a big hospital chain, and they give all this money. And so you're going to see they're going to put their doctor in, and they're going to put their PTs in, and they have a tremendous machine behind them, a marketing company, a marketing department for the hospital, and a marketing department for that doctor group, and they're going to promote it. And it looks great and it sounds great. We take care of blah, blah. And, that gives them automatic credibility. But it's really not fair, because it doesn't mean they're really good. It just means they bought the sponsorship for that team.
Right.
And so it goes back to relationships. And I think it can work for a while, but then it gets out there that this particular medical group hasn't done well by several players. And then players know. And players make the final decision and determination as to, who they're going to choose. And thankfully, they have the ability to get second opinions. And thankfully, there are people like you, Nieman, who can steer them in the right direction. So the person who's, quote, the team doctor or team physical therapist may have gotten there not by talent, but by financial relationship with the sponsor. And I think players need to know that. And I think that it could be a problem. And not to say there aren't some very good doctors who work for these big institutions. There are, but it's not uniform. And I think it's player beware, and player needs to do research. Agent, manager needs to help them. And personal relationship experience and talking to the doctors, I think, should be the final determination, or physical therapist, to know who's good and who's not. But it's challenging.
Yeah, for sure.
You mentioned the agent. In your experience, how involved have agents been in athletes' injury and choice in surgery?
Well, in football in particular, they seem to be very involved. They seem very protective. They seem very involved, and they seem to really care and be part of it. And it's often the case in basketball as well, that are the ones that come to me, that the agents usually find me through other, people I've taken care of. And so I would say that the agents are involved, are very much so. Hockey, a little bit less agent driven, but I think football and basketball, very agent driven.
Yeah.
They have a lot of different sports medicine and enhancements, like stem cells and PRP and things of that nature. And you did a lot of talking about player being more particular in who they let work on them, and who they're letting invest in their injuries. God forbid it may happen. One question I had was, is it smart to stick a needle in a tendon? I know that sounds simple, but I just wanted to hear your personal opinion on that. And then two, what are the sports medicine improvements that we might not know about, that you might have heard about, that might be coming out to help players, or that you think will or will not help players? Or do you think at all that those things actually do help players?
Wow, that's a bunch of questions, and I think very important ones. So I'll try to cover everything that you asked me if I remember them. So the first thing you asked me, is it okay to stick a needle in a tendon? And while I never like to use the term never, I think that putting a needle in a tendon should be done, infrequently and for really good reason. And because you have to know that, a needle is like a small knife. If you look at it under the microscope, it's a knife, and there are different sizes of needles. But so when you stick a needle in the tendon, you're actually doing a little damage to the tendon in doing so. And in certain circumstances for treatment, it may be a necessary thing. But again, it's not something one should take lightly. And it's certainly not something that is done or should be done frequently. And it should never, in my opinion, be done as a preventative tool. It may be done for a treatment tool. And then there comes this whole thing that I'd like to group as biologics, PRP, which stands for platelet-rich plasma, or, PPP, platelet-poor plasma, platelet-rich fibrinogen, stem cells, which the FDA says we shouldn't use, and sort of these, what we call bone marrow aspirate, which, you have some experience with, and in treating. So I think that's the new hot topic in sports medicine. Surgery techniques have gotten better and will continue, but I think the big thing would be trying to understand better the value of these biologic tools, when we should use them, how we should use them, and what the post-injection course should be. Like, a lot of folks come in and think, oh, I'm going to get a PRP shot, I'm out in 2 days and I'm fine.
Yeah.
And that's not the deal. The deal with PRP is it starts a healing process, and more so with this bone marrow aspirate situation. Bone marrow is when we take a large needle and put it into the bone, which is totally safe. We do it in the iliac crest, which is not the hip joint, but the wing bone. And out of there come some very valuable healing elements, probably the most powerful that the body has. And we often use that to supplement healing of tendons, to supplement, some damage to cartilage. And I think we're just now getting to understand it better. We used to use a technique where we had to centrifuge it down, and now we have a technique where we actually pull it directly out without centrifuging it to keep more of those healing elements there. And I think that that's the study or the focus of study going forward, which I think will help athletes perform better longer if we can, harness the body's own ability to heal itself by getting a different combination of these stem cell-like factors and put them in the area that needs to be healed. I think that's where the future is, but it's maybe not there yet. But it's something that is of great interest to me, and I do use and I do think is very valuable. On the other hand, like these foreign stem cells, taking it from amnio or other, it's the problem with all that right now. It's so unregulated. You just don't know what you're getting. And what scares me is, there are people selling this stuff on the market, and it's not regulated like a pharmaceutical medication. Like, anybody could say anything, and it's just their opinion. This is the greatest stuff since, XYZ, and you believe it, but there's no great regulation of it. And while I'm not a great, regulation fan, I think there has to be some standardization that when this says it's that, it's actually this. Mm-hmm. And to segue into the other topic that I think a lot of your viewers may be interested in are peptides, which I have some interest in. But again, it's a black box. You don't, you order this peptide or, the BPC 157 or others, and, there's no regulation of it. So you really don't know what you're getting. You can have a lab that says this is that, but there's no, way to know that what they're saying it is there, because the FDA doesn't regulate it. So I'm hoping at some point they see it as an important thing to do to regulate what they're selling.
Yeah. I had asked that question because from my own personal experience, before I had gotten hurt, I had no major injuries. And, when I had got to, where I was going with the team that I was on at the time, it was, they had did MRIs on my knees and seen I had a little wear and tear. So for preventative measures, I had gotten stem cells in my knees. And then, it's interesting to go back and look at it, because I remember it like it was yesterday. We're playing against the Toronto Raptors, and Kyle Lowry, who later being my teammate, kneed me knee to knee in my quad tendon, which I later tore that year. I couldn't finish the game. I had been knee to knee thousands of times before that. Thousands upon thousands of times before that. And it's just interesting to me collecting data and going through it, because the quad tendon tear is we've seen it, but it's not necessarily a common injury in basketball. It's also a common injury for older, maybe older people, I guess you would say. But looking back on it now, it's, and you say like, you shouldn't do things for preventative measures. It's interesting because it was kind of given to me as a preventative measure and said there were no side effects. So this is about learning. This is about teaching. So if any guy's in that position where someone may be telling you, or people are telling you that you have wear and tear in your knees, maybe we should do this to help you. Know that everybody has wear and tear in their knees. It's not Dr. Glashow will tell you everybody got something on their MRI, especially if you've been playing for a long time. And there's nothing that can be given to you to prevent you from doing anything later or prevent you from getting injured later. And you shouldn't get a needle directly inserted into your tendon when you've never done that before, and you've already been playing at a high level. So, that's just, obviously we're here to teach. I'm not here to blame anyone. Obviously, I'm not here to bash anyone or anything like that. That's more so just my personal experience and trying to teach the next generation and anybody really on things that we might not be educated on. So that's
I'm really impressed that you're able to talk about this, Vic, as you do. And I think it's a super important point. And it goes back to, who's advising you. The team doctor often looks out for the team. I think it may be a little different. I always feel that my first priority is always the player. And frankly, I think it's always what's in the best interest of the team anyway, but the player comes first. And I think if you take that, you'll always do what's best for the player. And it may not be the quickest way back, but it's also likely the best route for the team. So they can merge at some point. And I think it's important that, these injections for preventative care, there's no data that supports it. It would be bad enough to inject just your knee, but to inject your tendon, that's a particularly, worrisome approach because it weakens the tendon. And obviously, unfortunately, you're an example of that.
I know that for a fact. Yeah.
Doc, have you seen the documentary on Netflix called "Don't Die"?
Neem, I like the title. I don't want to die, but I have not seen it, and maybe you can enlighten me a little bit. But I promise you, I'm going to watch it.
It's a good one.
Okay, so there's this guy that was in tech, sold his company, and he wants to prove that he can reverse aging.
Yeah, I've heard of that. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And reason why I bring them up is because you obviously are pro take care of yourself,
yes.
Right? And I kind of want to get your thoughts on what the average humans should do to stay healthy, because I don't think it's as known as it should be, in a sense of should they get a blood panel to see what vitamins they're deficient in? What does one do if they feel like aches in their shoulder? Should they wait, or who should they see? If they go to the doctor and the doctor just prescribes them medication, what should they ask for? I think that these things are being mishandled on a high volume where, I don't think average humans understand that there are PTs or sports medicine places and that's what they go to. You have to go to a sports medicine place because there's not a place that's set up that's oh, your knee is hurting. Okay, come here and we'll stretch it out, or we'll show you what exercises to do. It's more so oh, your knee is hurting. Okay, let me give you this pill, and then the pain will go away.
Listen, there's no it's a piggyback. There's no place that's okay, your knee's hurting, and then you go and there's someone there that's knee specific. It's for that's their specialty. That's what they're good at. It's the same doctor that's looking at the whole that's looking at the whole thing, and he might not even be specialized in knees. You know what I'm saying? But I think that's a good book. That's another point. But go ahead, you can answer the question.
Yeah, no, listen, it's a broad topic, and I think it's a super important question to bring up and talk about. When I say about these tests and things, it's all about risk reward. There's no risk really in getting a blood test. There's no risk, in potentially getting an MRI, but there's no radiation. But there are a lot of risks in getting injections. There are a lot of risks on taking pills. There are a lot of risks in certain medications. So I don't think there's a one word answer, but I think there's some basic tenets that you need to work on, which is, strength and conditioning is key for people, pro sports and not. Diet and weight is very important. Maintaining your flexibility and maintaining your mental health. So what tests do you get for what people? I personally do and encourage patients to get a whole big blood panel to look at all the objective information that may be useful to guide them on what to do. But all too often, like Vic just, summarily mentioned, hey, you got knee pain, take this pill. The pill doesn't solve the problem. It solves the symptom. So right. I'm all about risk reward. Do something that's got very little risk, take a blood test, and a lot of reward, find out a lot of information. So I think I'd like to focus on the bigger rewards with the smaller risks. And then I think you have to advise patients, one at a time, independently. And I think to Vic's point, the doctor may not be an expert in knee and hips and ankles, but as a team doctor, I think the very valuable asset of a good team doctor is to know what they know, but also to know what they don't know, and not be afraid to ask for advice like I do.
Yes.
I'm not an ankle expert, other than Achilles. I'm not a concussion expert, but I know when I don't know it to get the right person. And I think it's really important to have subspecialists available, but have a smart team doctor triage it, meaning set you up with the right person. But getting tests and body weight, body comp, DEXA scan, vitamin D levels, super important, and no risk to getting those tests. And then how you deal with those responses or answers are very important, and getting the right people involved to manage it. And I think you bring up a good point. There is no one-stop shop. We've talked about that and trying to find it, but it's hard. In today's modern medicine, it's very, academic. Everybody gets the same treatment. People come to me and they go, oh, my tests are totally normal. Yeah, but if you don't have the right test to determine what's abnormal, everything's going to look normal, but the right test maybe wasn't done to find out what the abnormality is.
Yeah,
right.
That's huge.
Yeah, that's big time. What if somebody was having pain in their shoulder, in their knee, on their back, would you suggest to them right away, like let's say they have Kaiser, like, yeah, go to Kaiser, go to the doctor?
So I don't judge. I don't judge by the name on the, of the institution. I think there's probably some very good people at Kaiser, maybe a non-operative physiatrist is the type of doctor that would be, to evaluate. And I think it's better to be evaluated with non-invasive treatment than not be evaluated. So if that means going in and seeing somebody and maybe get some recommendation on an exercise, I think that's a reasonable thing to do. But if they're not responding to the treatment they're getting within a few weeks, I think they need to seek other treatment and or other opinions. So it's hard to take these scenarios and give you an exact answer, but I don't think people should ignore ailments that stay around for more than a few days or that started with an acute injury. In other words, if they went to pick something up and they feel something pop in their arm, they need to evaluate that fairly quickly. If it's a pain that's been going on and off for a bit, then I think there's a little more leeway in terms of how long you can wait to do it. And I think, all the non-invasive stuff is pretty safe. Physical therapy for the most part, if it's done reasonably well, I think that's pretty safe. Getting an MRI, I have a short fuse to get an MRI for something that was due to a trauma or something that's lasted more than, a few weeks. And I think getting information, objective information that doesn't involve an injection, for instance, is a reasonably good bet to do and get more information from to help, treat.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. So you wouldn't advise someone if they felt the pop, have pain, to think, oh, it'll go away?
Yeah, I think when you have an injury that involves a pop, or a noise, and you see a deformity, I think that needs to be seen right away. That's very different than somebody that's getting little aches and pains, over weeks or months. That's different. That may not be so worrisome or so time sensitive. Yeah. But you got somebody in the gym and they're lifting heavy and all of a sudden they feel something pop, doesn't feel right. I think that deserves more immediate attention, particularly if there's some black and blue or swelling or real limitation of motion or strength. I think those are kind of the cardinal signs that I would say, hey, you got to go see somebody quickly. And if you're not happy, get another opinion relatively quickly. Maybe get an MRI because that's non-invasive. There's no radiation in an MRI. There's really no harm to it.
Let me ask you, your like weekly regimen when it comes to like wellness. Like, what treatments do you get? What are you stretching? Like, how are you eating on a day-to-day and a weekly? Like, Like your month? Like, what does your month look like health and wellness wise?
Okay, so we're getting personal. I get it. I just feel better training and eating well. So I like to get a lot of protein. I weigh about 196, 97 pounds. So I like to eat at least, try to get in 100 grams of protein in a day. And I cheat by doing the protein shakes and trying to eat lean stuff. Of course I cheat, and of course I'm nowhere near perfect, but like during my days, like office days, they get really busy. I bring in a protein shake. I have some, good protein bars that have more, protein than carbs. But yeah, when after a long surgery night, might I have a martini? Yeah, of course. Not every day and never on a day before surgery, but you gotta let the mind cool down. And I think if you put people in this cage and can't do this, can't do that, I think that's destructive. I think, like we said earlier, moderation is really the key. So I tend to eat a lower carbohydrate diet most of the time, and I try that. And I'm really big into strength training. I think one thing your viewers should know is this great tool that, you guys know about, Vic knows, which is BFR, or blood flow restriction. It's a means of exercising under ischemia, where some of the blood flow to that extremity is cut off. So you can use less resistance, less force across the joint, and get the muscle to respond equally well or better. And I think it's a fabulous concept when used correctly. I do it at least once a week. And I found it to be extremely helpful for biking, because that's one of the things I like to do, outdoor cycling. And I've done like a Grand Fondo race last year at 85 miles on a lot of elevation, and it helped me enormously. And I think those kind of things are things that I think would be intriguing to your viewers, of how to do it, why it's so good, and how it can be less injury provoking to joints. Flexibility is another thing. I do stretching, could always do more. And I think it's something I try to do at least a couple times a week. Did it this morning. And I have a little bit of a routine that, Mike Sargent, who has worked with us, has helped me develop. Particularly quads and hips are important for me, because I do this kickboxing jazz, which is something I like to do and stay fit. And the stretching routines that Mike has given me have been very valuable, but I think I should be doing them more. And then soft tissue work. I go for at least one massage a week. Some of the TB12 guys or others are just something to work soft tissue, which I think Vic could tell us better than I could him, of how helpful that can be in recovery.
It's important. It's definitely important. Definitely important. I mean, you want all the muscles around all the other stuff to be soft and mobile. So tight, everything else will feel tight. That's for sure. Shout out to Mike too.
Yeah, we love Mike Sargent, man.
Shout out to Mikey, bro.
He's really good at what he does. And if you need a Ferrari of PTs, he is one of them.
For sure.
I agree.
Soft tissue is like a massage,
like
right?
a massage. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because I mean, people, they don't know, like, they're like, soft tissue. What is that? It's like, go get a massage.
Yeah, go get a massage.
Go
to the spa once a week.
Yeah.
Treat yourself.
I think it's helpful. And I think a deep tissue massage, I mean, I don't know why physiologically it works so well, but it seems to help. And I'm a believer.
Yeah. I'm a believer as well.
That's awesome, Doc.
That's good. That's good.
Awesome, Doc. We gonna wrap up the show here soon, and our last segment of the show, we got quick fire questions. So,
okay,
I'm gonna ask a question, and then just answer it in the best way you can possible. Neem, go ahead and ask number 2.
You've got firsthand experience with Victor. How confident are you that he could step on the NBA court and perform at or above the level he was performing at previously?
Great question.
Great question, and not hard to answer, because I'll be a little long-winded, but I think it's worth it. When I met Victor, he was playing with almost no quad tendon, I believe, on the right knee, and he showed me some recent videos, and I've seen him recently. I have no doubt, if that's what Victor Oladipo wants to do, he can get back out there at the level or even beyond significantly than he's functioned before. And it's a testament to his drive and efforts and energy that have got him here. So absolutely, I have no doubt that he can do that. It's up to him when he wants, and I guess he'll let us all know that when he's ready.
That's a fact. I appreciate that, Doc.
It's the truth, without hesitation.
Facts. I appreciate that. Who are your top 5 athletes of all time?
Yeah. Well, that's always a loaded. I would quote Kobe in saying, listen, you get hurt, stop complaining. The essence was, stop complaining, work hard, get back, and don't complain, and work harder, more diligently than you did before. And I think that quote sticks with me. There are a lot of favorite athletes. Of course, Vic, you're one of them. I don't like to point out names of those I take care of or admire the most, but that attitude, and it's your attitude, Vic, that I think is the most important factor in an athlete's return. Pull your big boy pants on and pull them up and go for it and be aggressive on your way to get back.
Yeah, definitely. But I was going to ask, but you're a sports fan though, right? Like you like sports, like you watch.
Of course I like sports, but it's a no, listen, I like a lot of, I like a lot I like the ones that aren't alive. I can talk about Muhammad Ali was somebody I've always admired. Artun Senna, the F1 driver who came from nowhere to perform at the level he did. But in terms of those who are still at it, there's so many that it'd be unfair to mention one over the other.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So it's not cool.
Those two are fire though. They are. But yeah, the other ones we already asked.
Yeah, we good. I think in the bonus segment, quick fire questions, it's like you ask one, I ask one.
Yeah, that's good. But Doc, man, we appreciate you taking the time out and joining us for this episode of the Inner Court. We appreciate the knowledge, and we really feel like it's definitely important, not only for athletes, but people all over the world. Health and wellness is a huge aspect of this world. And the better health and wellness we have, the better lives we'll live. So we appreciate you taking the time out and giving your opinion and giving us some knowledge.
Well, thank you both to you, Vio, and to Nieman. I'm flattered and grateful to be part of the show, and I believe in everything that you're doing and giving back, which is a common theme that I think we all like to do for the younger athletes or those up and coming, to show them what may be warning signs and help direct them in a more positive way to stay healthier longer. So thank you both for the opportunity of being here, and I mean it.
For sure.
We appreciate you, Doc.
For sure.
I want to say one more thing.
Go ahead, buddy.
Funny thing. Oftentimes, when you are on a group call with Dr. Glashow, oftentimes he is going to say that he is not the smartest person on the call. I would just like you to know that every single time that he is on that call, he is the smartest one on the call.
For sure.
But you need to take note that it is smart to say that, to make everyone feel comfortable, because you are so far ahead of them. I appreciate you.
The humility is
incredible, and it's taught me so much. I joke about it all the time, but it has taught me so much.
It's funny to hear you say that. I don't purposely say that, but, we're on some pretty intense calls. I remember, without mentioning other names and people on there, I know what I know well, but I also know there's a lot of stuff I don't know. And I learn from everybody. I learn from patients, nowhere near the level of VO. I've certainly learned an enormous amount from VO and obviously from you too, Nieman. And I mean it. I think everybody can teach us something. And I think if we become too arrogant that we think we know it all, that's the first sign of trouble. And I think my dad always said, and I believe, that a smart person is somebody who knows what they don't know. And there's a lot I don't know, and I want to learn more. And I think working together with guys like you have made me be better and look better. So I thank you.
Hey, man, I appreciate it.
That's big time, Doc.
We go back and no holds barred. We have a, I think, very good relationship. And I think without question that you've taught me both enormous things, and I'm appreciative and grateful for that. So thank you.
We appreciate your life, Doc.
Shout out to Maddie too, man.
Yes.
Madison.
Yes.
Madison G. Thank you. All right.
Thanks, Doc, man.
We appreciate you.
Enjoy your weekend. Your house looks incredible.
It looks incredible.
I want you to come up and visit. Better here in the summer visit. We're up north, but I'd love to have you guys both. So thank you.
We will stop by for sure.
All right.
Yes, sir.
All right, Doc.
All right, Doc.
All right, Doc.
Cheers. Over and out.